Welcome to a special edition of Jeff Koinange Live on the Road. Tonight we're coming to you from the spanking new studios of the Kenya Defense Forces here at the DoD headquarters in Nairobi. Spanking new. And you wonder, KDF studios? Does that make sense? They've been so secretive all these years. Well, there seems to be a general shift. On top of that, we've got an exclusive access and an exclusive interview with the man at the top of the helm, the man who runs all three branches of the military, the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. And by the way, he's the only four-star general in Kenya. He's been in the military more than 40 years. He has a wealth of experience, both in Kenya and overseas. And we're going to talk about it. There's so many questions people want to know. The military's role in civilian life, KMC being run by the military, Nairobi Metropolitan Services being run by a military man, my good friend General Badi, and many other questions that you may have. Actually, start tweeting at Koinange Jeff, at Citizen TV Kenya, the hashtag JK Live with the General begins right now. General, good to see you. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much for allowing me to be interviewed by Jeff.
Now, look, we brought our bench to you.
Right.
It's a big deal.
You've come all the way to
the
defense headquarters.
Yes, headquarters.
Thank you very much. We're very honored.
Strategic communications, or STRATCOMs.
Right.
What is that? Is that a new direction the KDF is taking?
It is not really a new direction. It is a direction that many modern defense forces are taking for reasons that war fighting has changed. Warfare has changed dramatically because of technological advancement. And what has happened is that, as you know, information is one of the elements of national power, together with diplomacy, military, and economics. And therefore, for the KDF to be able to be relevant in modern environment of warfare, we have had to think of how we develop a capability. This is a capability that allows us to sharpen our arrowhead to be able to fight better. You will know that information influences not just those outside, but also internally. We need the support of the Kenyan public in everything that we do, whether we are undertaking an external engagement, either peacekeeping or fighting, or whether we are undertaking a project that is related to civil military affairs, whether we are participating in disaster responses. We need the Kenyan people, who are the taxpayers, to know exactly what we do. And there's no better way to win them over by getting a platform of this nature that will be able to develop content and disseminate that content. I'm
glad you mentioned that, General, because a lot of people are wondering right now, they're seeing you on TV and they've probably never seen you before, or have hardly seen you before.
Yes.
So they're wondering, who is General Robert Kibochi?
General Kibochi is a military officer from the Army, joined the Kenya Defense Forces way back in 1979 after graduating from high school. I studied around Gilgil. For those who know Gilgil, is a home to a lot of security agents there. And the influence, obviously, of being within the environment where soldiers are marching everywhere, holding guns, became a motivating factor for most of us who joined. I'm not the only one, by the way. There are many of us who came from that environment who joined the Defense Forces. And therefore, I have grown into the Defense Forces by joining what we call the Signals Corps. It's a communications department that is responsible for providing communications and information system support to the fighting force. And I've grown through there, commanded the Corps there, and over time, as a senior officer, I also became the commander of the Army and became the Vice Chief of Defense Forces. And now here I am as the the top general.
The tip of the arrow.
Absolutely.
Answerable to only one man.
The tip of the arrowhead.
The commander himself in chief. So, General, let me ask you this. It's been, what, 10 years since Operation Linda Inchi?
Right.
Kenya's foray into Somalia. A decade later, what lessons have we learned from that?
I think it's not been 10 years to the extent that Linda Inchi is defined. As you know, we got into Linda Inchi on the 14th of October 2011, and after 6 months, we rehatted after achieving our objective. And the objective at the time of getting into Somalia in response to the provocation of the AlShabab, in many ways, we as a country decided that we had to defend our sovereignty. And therefore, we were able to get into Somalia, as a country, and push the AlShabab. And then later on, after 6 months, we joined AMISOM. We became a member of AMISOM. So we've been in AMISOM now for close to 10 years, as part of the multinational force of over 22,000 soldiers out there. Now, there has been a lot of development over that period of time. You will know, for example, that the menace of AlShabab was prevalent a lot in not just Kenya, but also even other neighboring countries. But you will agree with me that there has been drastic change in terms of the threats that we face from this menace of AlShabab. We've also been able to liberate quite a number of areas. Today, if you were to visit our troops in Kismayu, you will not believe it, because Kismayu is alive with a lot of business activities taking place. There are no threats of AlShabab. And the reason for that is because of the presence of AMISOM. And we are in AMISOM, we are in Kismayu, we are in major cities, towns that we've been able to liberate. And therefore, from the overall, we have achieved drastic milestones that was supposed to be achieved. Have we gotten to the end state? Not yet. The reason being that what has been happening over the last 10 years, we've been applying kinetic force. The kinetics where you are hitting on the enemy. What needs to be done now is to bring in development. People need to see development coming in, schools reopening, children going to school, and so that you can dry the pool where the AlShabab recruits from. And that is what is going to happen now that we are getting into a period where AMISOM is being reconfigured. You will know that there is a debate coming up at the Security Council that is looking at how the AMISOM can be reconfigured. And our thinking has always been, now that we have been able to degrade the threat, it is time for us to bring in other dimensions. We need to bring economic dimension. You need to bring in social development into this space. And so that you can open up the country, open up the roads, get infrastructure in place, and so that we can, at some point, get to a point where the Somali National Security Forces themselves can take over from us.
When you talk about reconfiguring AMISOM, and I know it's not up to the Kenyans alone, but 10 years later, do you see AMISOM still continuing for the next few? You still see them in the long term?
We see AMISOM, yes, continuing, because one of the challenges that you face in a place like Somalia, there is normally no peace to keep there. And therefore, you need forces that are willing to stand up to the threat of AlShabab. And the 5 countries currently in Somalia, Kenya, Ethiopia, Djibouti, Burundi, these are countries that have demonstrated the will to fight the AlShabab. And I think, in my view, these countries will be still very useful in a reconfigured AMISOM. It is important that other actors come into play. other attacks come into play, and so that we can be able to pool resources to be able to do the final bit. And that final bit is what I'm saying, of ensuring that you dry the pool where the AlShabab is recruiting. It is recruiting because there are no schools there. So children grow, there are no opportunities, there are no social amenities, so they end up joining the AlShabab. Yeah. So this is an area where, as you know, the international community is very much aware of. You said you are in Sierra Leone. That's right. And that's exactly what happened out there. We did not just go there to get the RUF out of the place. The RUF went, but development came into play. And today is a thriving country.
Absolutely. Yeah. General, one thing that's on vivid in Kenyans' memories is the fall of the attack on El Ade.
Right.
2016. Right. It was about 5 years ago.
Yes.
What lessons did we learn from that?
Right. A lot of lessons. We learned a lot of lessons, and at a very high cost, because at the time that we got joined to AMISOM, the threat of IED was not as prevalent as we know it. We knew that the AlShabab was making IEDs, but they would place them on the roads, and we could be able to get equipment that would be able to identify them as we moved in convoys. Less did we know that AlShabab had developed a capability far bigger than IEDs on the roads. And this is what they call the vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices. Filling a whole truck with explosives and then ramming it into a camp. Okay, somebody has decided that he will die, the driver, and they're blowing it up. And that was the first time that a vehicle-borne IED was employed to hit a base. Now, what lessons do we learn? We learned that this is a threat that will continue to thrive. The first thing is to strengthen our bases. We have close to about 14 or 15 bases, what we call the forward operating bases. So we had to undertake a whole reconfiguration of our defenses. Ensure that you have trenches, double trenches, okay, on the outside and inside, and so that when these vehicles come, they get into the ditches. And you will know, since El Ade and since Kolbio, thereafter, we are very confident that we have strengthened those particular areas. So the protection is great. So that is one lesson that we learned after having gone through that experience of El Ade and Kolbio.
Obviously, there's been a lot of fallen soldiers in the last 10 years.
Absolutely.
And the fallen soldiers' families are probably watching you right now, General.
Absolutely.
What do you tell them?
The fallen soldiers, we tell them every day, and we take care of them as much. You will know that we just come back from celebrating those fallen soldiers during the KDF Day at Kahawa Garrison. And the fallen soldiers' families are never forgotten. We have made sure that we continue to take care of them in terms of welfare. We made sure that if there are placements for schools and jobs, we also help, because they are part of the family. KDF really is a family. You cannot do without the family. The family is a critically important piece. And yes, there has been fallen soldiers. Families are left behind. It is our job as leaders of the Kenya Defence Forces to ensure, and these commanders here, to ensure that we take care of them.
General, you talked about AlShabab a few minutes ago. Has AlShabab changed in the last 10 years? Has the enemy changed in the last 10 years?
The AlShabab has changed. The enemy has changed. And the reason that the enemy has changed is because the enemy has been linked to the Al-Qaeda. It's a huge network spreading in Northern Africa, in the Maghreb, and elements in Afghanistan, and the ISIS now that has joined in. Now, these linkages between these groups bring in new dimensions. One is that as opposed to the AlShabab that we knew, for example, that would use an ID or vehicle-borne ID, the AlShabab now uses drones. Okay. Now that means they can surveil your facilities, and therefore, what lesson do we learn from there? Anti-drone capabilities is important for us to have with the troops. Secondly, there is a question of AlShabab never used to have indirect fire weapons capability, using mortars, for example. And mortars, you can fire a mortar from 5 kilometers into a base. And therefore, these are lessons that have been mastered by this enemy from the experiences of other groups from other regions. And yes, the AlShabab continues to mutate into different forms. The AlShabab also, as you know, has had to recruit foreign fighters who come from all over the world to engage in this kind of fighting. But has AlShabab been degraded? Absolutely. Absolutely degraded in a bigger way. What we're dealing with now is the remnants that we must be able to now get the international community to support the future AMISOM to be able to do the final job so that we can be able to hand over, at appropriate time, as AMISOM, to the Somali National Security Forces, whether they are police or military.
And yet, once in a while, AlShabab is able to break through, General. Westgate, Dusit, and others countless that we probably never hear about.
Right.
Does that mean that you, us, everybody, we have to be on alert all the time?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that is important, where you are dealing with a faceless enemy. A faceless enemy who you might not know, or who is your neighbor, you know, and therefore it is the responsibility of us all, not just the security forces, to be on the lookout. Look out at behaviors that change of children who have disappeared and joined the AlShabab. Parents must come out and say, my child has disappeared and you know, they have not been seen. And normally they would go into this movement. And as you know, the AlShabab is also recruiting through the social media. They are able to recruit using the social media very effectively. And that is the reason why this war has to be fought by all of us, every one of us. Right.
Is that also one of the important things about strategic communication stratcoms?
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. To be able to get to know, you know, the elements of AlShabab. They're very good at using social media, and sometimes they can be ahead of the security forces. How do we counter that as a defense force? So those are the capabilities we must have.
Sure. It reminds me a lot of America after 9/11.
Right.
Place will never be the same again in terms of alertness or being caught unawares.
Absolutely.
Is there that fear in the military that, you know, we might get caught unawares one day?
It is not fear, really. It is a concern, and genuinely so, because there is always going to be somebody sneaking in. What the citizenry doesn't probably get to know is how many of those incidences of threats are stopped by the intelligence, by the troops in the field. I go visiting these troops, and I'm very, very proud of them, because right now we have a lot of troops along the border, sealing off that border. Is there a likelihood that somebody is going to slip through? There is obviously going to be, and therefore the rear areas that we are occupying must also be alert to these kind of breakthroughs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
General, before I take a break, I want to ask you one last question that has to do with Kenya and Somalia. The recent ruling by the International Court of Justice about the international territorial waters or maritime border. Does that raise tensions more with Somalia? Because Commander-in-Chief, the President, said he's not going to give up an inch. Does that raise tensions even more?
I don't think it should, because remember, Somalia and Kenya are going to be neighbors. We never chose who would be where. So I think there is a sense that there is need for us to be able to agree to live harmoniously. Because if you come to think about it, those people who are bordering Somalia, in Mandera, in Kiunga, these are same people. They are the same people. You will not believe it. The number of students who go to schools in Mandera from across Somalia are very many. Now, we cannot afford to not to allow them to come and study. In Kiunga, for example, those who come to get medical support from the Kenyan side are so many. That relationship will always continue. I believe at some point there has to be discussions around this matter because you're right. There is no way if you have a border that has been existing for all these years, somebody can come and say that no, it doesn't, it didn't pass here. That is not acceptable, and that's where the no inch less is a red line, because Kenya belongs to Kenyans, and nobody will allow any part to be ceded. So there is a sense, therefore, that the discussions will have to continue even after the ruling. Because it's important that continues. Yeah. Yes.
Gentlemen, I want to take a break, come back, talk about military involving itself a lot in civilian affairs these days. Everything from Nairobi Metropolitan Services to Kenya Meat Commission. A lot of people asking, what did it take so long? Why did it take so long? Also, women in the military. You see a lot of promotions of late. How is that going about? And it's amazing that, you know, this giant complex has been here all my life. I've never been to this place. First time ever.
Right.
Is the military opening up more to ordinary Kenyans? We'll talk about that after the break.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We have a special exclusive interview, one-on-one with the man, the 4-star general himself, General Robert Kibochi. He's the man at the helm of all 3 branches of the military, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force. He's the CDF. We're talking to him live here in their studios at Strategic Telecommunications, or Stratcoms, right here on Jeff Koinange Live. We'll take a break. Keep tweeting at Koinange Jeff, at Citizen TV Kenya, the hashtag JK Live. JK Live takes a break. We'll be back in a moment.